The 67 to 72 Chevy pickup was so iconic that today it's an even hotter resto mod. Jeremy and LT rip into the C10 with a vengeance, stripping her bare, then dropping her down. Who's ready to get dirty?
We're kicking off a new project today here at Truck Tech, this 1971 Chevy C10, and we're about to get crazy with it. We picked up this relatively straight and rust-free example of a classic American truck up in Kentucky, and we're going to put our own signature on it, and it won't be a mild build either. Let me give you the big picture. We're building a powerful, reliable daily driver that's going to be slammed on airbags.
Under the hood is a carbureted 350 that actually runs pretty well. The previous owner added a few nice parts like an aluminum intake, a pair of valve covers, and a pretty nice set of headers. But we're going to be replacing it with the latest engine technology available today, this direct injected 6.2-liter pushrod V8, also known as the LT1.
And we got ours from Pace Performance. The LT1 is essentially the same exact engine you'll find under the hood of the C7 Corvette. Rated at 460 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque, our C10 is going to get down the road in a hurry. And the best part about direct injection is the fuel mileage.
And this engine is so new, it may be the first time you see one go in an old project like we have here.
Well, let's get this truck torn down.
I'll grab some tools. We'll begin up front with the hood. A few bolts on each side, and we can lift it away. Followed by the hood hinges.
Next up is the grille.
Looks like someone may have needed a little room at one point in time. Looks like they came in and torched these fenders out. Wow. Grab a new set of fenders for it.
You know, the other thing you can notice on a truck like this where someone's been in there and messed around is these headlight buckets. The headlights are attached directly to the core support. There's supposed to be a spring-loaded bucket that you can actually align for the headlight. That's why these look so sunk in.
The windshield wiper arms have to go to allow the wiper cowling to be removed, after freeing up a few stubborn screws.
The fenders are next. One thing you need to pay attention to when you're disassembling a truck like this is the shims. If you remember exactly what hole they came out of, you'll get your fender alignment spot on when you go to reassemble the truck later. After removing some of the body bolts holding the fender to the core support, we move on to the bolts holding the fender well to the fender, but they won't unscrew. The 45-year-old clips break off and the bolts just spin. So Jeremy and I will use a cutoff wheel to remove the heads of the bolts without damaging the fenders.
The bumper is in the way of the fenders, so it's removed next. The fenders lift away and can be added to our growing pile of parts. We want to save as much original sheet metal as we can, so we won't scrap any usable parts until the project is 100% done.
Here it comes. The coolant is drained into a bucket by removing the lower radiator hose.
You never have a big enough drain pan.
Getting to the radiator is pretty easy now, with these Matco Infinium guns spinning out the bolts in no time. The fan shroud quickly follows. The inner fenders are about to go after fighting with more rusty hardware. Someone actually welded the passenger side fender to the core support, so a chisel and hammer are needed to free the sheet metal.
Yeah, say we have a little rust there. Inner fenders have quite a little bit of rust, so we could even patch these, but they're so cheap from Brothers, we may as well just pick up a couple of new ones. With the front clip more or less disassembled, we can turn our attention to the rear and pull out this plastic bed liner. Well, there was a reason why that was in there.
I'll say.
Wow, looks like we need a bed floor.
Yeah.
A little word to the wise. Whenever purchasing a used truck, thoroughly look underneath a bed liner to see what may be hiding.
Looks like whoever owned this truck must have loaded a lot of firewood on the tailgate or something.
I would say so. It's got a good bow in it.
To get the bed off the truck, we need to work underneath,
Swing the fronts under.
and luckily we have a lift. But for you guys at home, a creeper works just as well. Believe me, I've been there.
It's actually pretty solid.
You know, when I saw that bed floor, I was worried.
I was too.
There's been a few patches here and there.
They've patched this brace, but it's not bad.
Not all, we can work with it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've
Always
seen
seen
a lot
worse.
worse. Yeah, of course. Yeah, the floors are actually really solid. I'm impressed with that. Frame looks really good too.
Oh, the frame's
I
beautiful.
don't see any bends or kinks in it. There's
Nothing.
no pits. I mean, that's nice. Yeah, it looks like somebody's probably heated these springs at some point in time to get that lowered stance. You can tell how they're almost flat.
Hey, that's the cheap way to do it, right?
Yeah, it is. You can get it low that way, that's for sure.
With a little WD-40 on the bed bolts, they can be removed. To prevent spilling when we pull them out later, we're draining the fluids from the engine.
Tell somebody took good care of this and changed the oil frequently based on the color.
I made a bit of a mess removing the transmission pan, but once all the fluid is out, it goes back on. And we can set the truck back down on the ground to continue.
Next, more surprises await as the teardown of the C10 continues.
We're part way through the teardown of our C10 project, getting ready to pull the bed and taking it to a bare frame.
Here, I got this. You just get yours on. An overhead crane makes quick work of removing the bed.
This isn't the first 71 that's been in our shop.
A few years back, this Chevy Cheyenne was treated to an LS swap, a freshened up stock suspension, and a disc brake conversion along with a few custom touches, like a one-piece glass kit from Brothers and some trick fab to relocate the fuel door.
All in all, this black beauty was turned into a fuel-saving, reliable daily driver that still kept its classic good looks.
Our C10 will be similar, but way over the top, with bags on all four corners and a new Corvette power plant that will have hot rodders in awe.
One lesson you need to learn is before you lift the cab all the way off, triple check your wires because you don't want to rip and tear anything with a hydraulic hoist.
After the frame is rolled out, we can get a good look at the underside and frame mounts.
A little bit of rust in the door corners, a little bit behind the cab, but other than that, it's a really solid truck to be as old as it is. Looks like it took some blows though. Yeah, this cab has definitely never been off the frame because these body mounts were rusted solid to the chassis.
Before we pull the engine, we'll cut off this 90s era exhaust, which we'll throw in the scrap heap.
It's junk and I still want to save it and you want to cut everything.
I'm not ruining nothing. The headers are still fine. Just cut. You want to save that rusty old 2-inch crimped exhaust?
I'm only cutting this one because you cut it. Oh yeah, man, we can put that on a rat rod.
Remember, parts like headers in the old small block and turbo 350 trans may have some value, so we'll save them for the swap meet. The rest is recycled.
One thing I really like about this frame, somebody hasn't painted it over and over and over and undercoated it. And should be pretty easy to clean up and
Yeah, it's still
get it painted.
still fairly fresh
Yeah,
for
it's
what
nice.
it is.
It's really good for its age.
Because our project involves an engine swap, we're taking the time to make some detailed notes about the engine's position within the frame, so our new LT1 goes back in the same general place. I want the bell housing flange to be in the same location front to back, and the crankshaft centerline to be the same height as the stock 350s.
And hopefully the new one will fit in the same exact place.
Notes are an invaluable resource to refer back to later on when we're reassembling a project. With the data collected, the engine and transmission leave the C10, never to return.
We're gonna go ahead and get all of the suspension off the truck, cut off anything we won't need anymore, and start prepping the frame for paint. Up front, the wheels come off. And to prevent any injury, these protruding bumper brackets go next. Removing the tie rod at the spindle and the idler arm is a quick way to disconnect the steering parts all in one group. The old shocks get ripped off, and some hammer therapy loosens up the taper on the lower ball joint. That's a great way to let out some aggression.
Anytime you work with coil springs, be very careful. Our job was made easier because in the past, somebody heated up these coils with a torch, and the springs don't have as much stored energy as usual. However, if you do this step improperly, you can cause injury to yourself.
Get out of here. The upper control arm comes off with the spindle and hub attached. The lower control arms unbolt, along with the motor mounts. I cannot stress enough how important it is to bag and tag every single thing you take off. Just like these motor mounts, even if we know we're not going to use them again or the hardware, it's good just to go back and have this stuff to reference to later on.
A good tip is to mark everything you want to get rid of with a paint marker. There are several tabs and brackets we'll be getting rid of, and the paint makes it easier to remember what parts need to go once you're in demolition mode.
Toward the rear of the truck, the shocks and U-bolts are removed, as well as the panhard bar. Now we can lift out the stock axle. To make removal easier, we cut the coil springs and drop the trailing arm. With the spring gone, we can easily get to the bolts, holding the spring mount to the frame.
The trailing arm crossmember is riveted in, and our tried and true method makes fast work of those stubborn things. Just make sure to wear proper safety equipment. Rivets make excellent projectiles. A few whacks with a dead blow free the crossmember from the frame.
Got it? Yep.
This custom hitch was an accident waiting to happen, so it goes away for good.
And now the real fun begins.
Whose idea was this?
Using a variety of power wire brushes and sanders, we cleaned up this 1971 frame to prepare it for paint. We ran into rust, grease, and grime, but a few hours later, the frame is looking so much better.
Unfortunately, we can't say the same thing about us.
I had fun today. I don't think LT had very much fun. Did you enjoy this?
I don't know, this is
Part of building
halfway.
Part of building a hot rod, man.
Ahead, the goods that'll put the drop on this classic truck.
We're moving our Resto Mod 55 F100 out of the way to make room for our C10 in the prep booth. It's more of a real-world build.
Yeah, something like you guys would do in your own garages. So for the frame, it's getting a rattle can treatment.
First, we'll degrease the entire surface, removing any debris, dust, or metal particles from our wire brushing.
Then follow up with Loctite's Extend Rust Treatment. It's a brush-on application that also comes in aerosol cans. Now, I've been using this product for years, and trust me when I tell you, it really works. Just pour a little bit into a mixing cup and brush on a thin layer. Now, you don't need much, and you can just go over the rust areas. Once it starts turning black, that's how you know it's working. After the rust converter is cured, a little air will blow any dust and dirt away from the frame. This is a good time to wipe everything down with some wax and grease remover. This would get rid of any remaining oils that would prevent the paint from sticking properly.
Just like you would do in your driveway, we're using aerosol cans of Duplicolor's VHT, roll bar, and chassis paint. A couple of coats will really transform the look of our classic frame, and it's going to be quite a durable finish.
For our suspension, we went to brotherstrucks.com and picked up one of their air suspension kits that comes with everything we need for installation. Bags for all four corners, bag mounting brackets, shock relocating brackets, and of course all four shocks. Now this is a true bolt-in kit that just requires a little bit of drilling. And with that alone, at rod height, you'll have about a 3 to 4 inch drop, and fully deflated close to 7 or 8 inches. Now that may be all the drop you're after, but with our C10, we want to get it as low to the ground as we can. So we're also adding a set of 2-inch drop spindles up front. Out back, a pair of their heavy-duty trailing arms with 1.5 inch lowering blocks, and a bolt-in C-notch to give our axle room to travel. We'll get started by installing this crossmember. Just need a little persuasion. There we go. The hardware provided is larger than the rivet holes, so we enlarge them. And bolt the crossmember in place. Then bolt on the trailing arm brackets.
We have to cut a notch in the frame to allow the axle to go as low as possible. So we'll clamp the upper reinforcement into place and drill the mounting holes. This will serve as a template to mark where the frame needs to be removed. Once the reinforcement is out of the way, a cutoff wheel makes quick work of the notch. While taking a chunk out of the frame does make it weaker, the reinforcement plates will more than make up for the missing frame. Hit the bare metal with some paint to prevent rusting, and when it's dry, bolt in the upper and lower reinforcement. Next, the trailing arms can attach.
Let's see, we want to go in the highest one because we want to be as low as we can.
Tell you what, after all that cutting and grinding and welding, the rest of this should bolt on pretty quick and easy.
Yeah, this should be pretty straightforward now.
I like it.
With the other arm installed and the airbags pre-assembled, they can be attached first to the control arm and then to the frame of the truck. The stock rear axle has been painted and goes back into place.
We haven't cracked the cover just yet, but we are going to come back and add a posi and some brakes later on. Right now though, lowering blocks can go between the axle and the trailing arm, followed by the U-bolts and the supplied lower shock mount that sandwiches in between the bolts.
The shocks are next, and to finish up the rear, we'll install the panhard bar to keep the axle centered. To get the front of our C10 bagged, LT will prep the lower control arms to accept the new suspension.
The control arms, spindles, and many of the brackets in this kit are bare steel and must be painted before they go on. So now is a great time to do it. After lunch and the paint dries, new lower ball joints get pressed in with our hydraulic press. And the upper ball joints bolt onto our new tubular control arms. With the front spring mount clamped into place, 4 3/8" holes are drilled. Then we can assemble the air springs and bolt it up for good. Next, the lower control arms attached with factory hardware. Then the upper control arms mount in their original locations. The spindle attaches first at the upper ball joint, and the lower control arm swings up to meet it. To get a longer travel shock, these extenders bolt onto the frame after a few more 3/8" holes are drilled. The supplied shocks finish up the front suspension and we'll get our truck riding on air. We're going to freshen up the steering system on our classic C10 with these new Moog parts from rockauto.com. We picked up a set of their inner and outer tie rod ends as well as new threaded adjustment sleeves. We elected for the upgraded idler arm and pitman arm, and we also picked up a remanufactured manual steering gearbox. Together, all these parts are going to give our classic C10 direct and precise steering control. 3 bolts hold our new steering box to the frame. Next, the idler arm attaches, followed by our truck's original center link. After the tie rod assemblies go into place, the steering is complete.
Brothers recommends the use of sway bars when converting to air suspension, so we had them send us a front and rear sway bar kit. It uses polyurethane bushings and includes the hardware and brackets you need for installation. Now this will definitely complement our lowered suspension by reducing body roll and improving handling. Now you can install this on your factory truck with the use of these taller brackets, but since we're already lowered, we'll get started up front by installing these shorter ones. The frame brackets install using factory holes, and once the bushings are greased, they slip over the sway bar. With a little help, the sway bar can be attached to the frame mounts and bolted up.
We'll get the truck on the ground and temporarily install our air system by making connections at the tank and all 4 corners of the bags. Well, we made great progress on our C10 this week. We got it laying on the ground with the air, and with it pumped up all the way, we actually have a pretty decent ride height.
Yeah, man, I love this air ride. And next time you guys see this truck, we're gonna do a little bit of rust repair, finish plumbing this chassis, and hopefully stick that new LT1 in between these frame rails. Yeah, that's cool.
A lot of work.
Yep, it's cool though.
The C10 is back. And LT and Jeremy have a lot on their shift list, including marrying up their Corvette engine to this bulletproof 6-speed, plus how to fit this modern package into a 45-year-old chassis. That's all today on Truck Tech.
We're very excited today to bring you a first here on Truck Tech. Well, you know the saying, what's old is new again. Well, today, what's old is our 71 C10 that we tore down a few weeks ago.
And what's new is a power plant that's hiding underneath this blanket. Something that's so cutting edge, it just recently became available as a crate engine. And something GM probably never imagined would be between the frame rails of a classic C10.
Ready?
Let's do it. Boom.
This is the LT1 from Pace Performance. It's the most technically advanced small block V8 that Chevrolet has ever designed. And what's equally impressive is where this engine calls home from the factory.
The LT1 is the centerpiece of two of the hottest sports cars available from General Motors today, the Camaro SS and the Corvette Stingray. Everything about these high-performance machines is an engineering marvel. From the high-tech electronics and aerodynamics of the Stingray to the speed and pinpoint handling of the SS. But this is a truck show, right?
Absolutely. And from where we stand, this is a light truck engine. So whether you want more power for your late model sport truck or you're just reviving a classic like we are, here's what makes the LT1 so advanced.
The Gen 5 LT1 uses a trio of technologies that delivers high performance with greater fuel efficiency. Direct injection uses high-pressure injectors to precisely deliver fuel to each cylinder for efficient combustion. This reduces fuel consumption and emissions while increasing power.
Active fuel management reduces fuel consumption by using two-stage hydraulic valve lifters to temporarily and seamlessly deactivate half of the cylinders under light load driving conditions. The system reactivates the cylinders when the driver needs more power.
Continuously variable valve timing works with active fuel management to get air in and exhaust gases out of the combustion chamber. This improves fuel economy and drivability while reducing emissions.
What does this translate to? 460 horsepower out of 6.2 liters. And in the new Corvette Stingray, 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds with a top speed of 186 miles per hour.
We're going to go ahead and mate up our LT1 to the state-of-the-art T56 6-speed manual transmission we picked up from American Powertrain. But before we do that, there's a few plumbing issues we have to finish up back at the chassis involving the fuel system and some brake lines.
We picked up this new fuel tank from Brothers Truck Parts to replace the original in-cab tank. Because let's face it, that's not the safest place for 20 gallons of gasoline. Installation is pretty simple. We'll use one existing hole already in the frame. So the first step is to line our mounting bracket up with that hole. And since it's easier to get a drill on the underside of the frame, I'll line the bracket up on the bottom and then mark and drill 2 additional holes in each frame rail. With the frame rails complete, we can temporarily slide the tank up into place. Looks good. Now, looking down at our tank, it actually looks a little crooked in the frame, but what's going on here is this cross member is running at an angle, it's not straight. So we measured off the rear cross member and the frame rails because we know they're straight, that way we know our tank is good and centered. With the tank held down, I can go back and mark all the holes. And then drill the 6 holes away from the C10 frame. Doing it this way ensures perfect alignment without guessing. Now we can mount the tank in between the frame rails for good.
Brothers Truck Parts supplied pre-bent and pre-flared lines for the project. And it's a good idea to install them now because some of them run underneath our soon-to-be mounted drivetrain.
Coming up, the LT1 and T56 say I do.
There are many different ways to get the power from the back of your engine to the ground. And we knew early on we wanted a manual transmission in our classic C10 for that classic muscle car feel. I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about. But because we're converting from an automatic transmission, we just didn't have any of the parts that we would need to get started.
Yet American Powertrain specializes in pro-fit installation kits for 5- and 6-speed manual transmissions, and it begins with the industry standard. Tremec 5- and 6-speed gearboxes are manufactured in North America and are known as one of the smoothest shifting, longest lasting powertrains money can buy. American Powertrain is the world's largest distributor of these bad boys.
Once they arrive in the Cookeville, Tennessee facility, technicians work with customers to put together a package that will help get their trans installed in their project in a weekend. No guesswork required.
We provided the information on our 71 C10 and they came up with an installation package, which includes this T56 Tremec transmission, a White Lightning adjustable shifter, a Hydromax clutch actuator kit, along with a new clutch and a quick time bell housing.
To prevent you from running back to the store chasing parts, American Powertrain included all the little things you need to complete the swap, like this adjustable cross member, a shift handle for a bench seat, some spacers for the throwout bearing, all the hardware, and a transmission mount.
With the flywheel torqued down, we need to install the clutch disc.
Gotta get all the oils off the flywheel so the clutch doesn't slip on it.
Use the alignment tool to hold the clutch in place while the pressure plate is bolted on.
Now they give you these tools here to center the clutch disc on the flywheel, but they never get it exactly centered. So while you tighten it up, I always like to kind of wiggle it back and forth and up and down just to make sure it's as centered as we can get it. So when you install the transmission, the input shaft slides right into the bearing.
Install the bell housing and torque to spec. Before we go any further, we need to set the spacing on the clutch release bearing.
So we got to have between 150 and 200 thousandths of free travel between the fingers of the pressure plate and the throwout bearings. Let's see what we got here. It's about even about 2066. Okay. All right, see what we have on this side.
If the spacing is wrong, the clutch won't entirely disengage, making shifting difficult, or wouldn't entirely grab and will slip. We had too much clearance, so we added a shim to adjust and bring it into range.
With the clutch release bearing in spec, we can begin lining up the engine to the transmission, sliding the input shaft into the clutch.
Tail pin's just not sliding in the hole. It's right there. It's just not.
This is obviously an important step, so take your time. Once the transmission mount is in place, we can now lower the whole thing into the frame. Well, Jeremy, it's gonna fit. What do you say?
I think we may get lucky here, LT.
We've done our homework, so I hope it does.
Exciting moment, I know that. How are you looking?
Good. Slide that
Let me
cross
go ahead
member
and
on
get
there. Good.
Okay, ease it on down. Looking good back here.
Because this LT1 engine is so new, there really isn't much information out there about swapping it into an older chassis. But with a little bit of homework, this turned out to be a completely bolt-in situation, no cutting required. For starters are the motor mounts. We found these on an online auction of all places, and they're made out of billet aluminum, and they allow us to bolt up our factory 1971 350 rubber isolators.
Pace Performance hooked us up with this prototype serpentine accessory drive from Street Shop, which includes this LS-style water pump and a one-wire alternator. But what's really cool is they were able to provide us with a power steering pump, which the LT engine did not come equipped with from the factory. So not only will we have power steering, but we'll now be able to run Hydro Boost brakes. Now for headers, we went to JBA and they sent us 2 sets to choose from, a set of shorties, which we already have bolted onto the engine, and a set of long tubes, which we think will work a little better for us in this chassis.
We're going to get the cab back on the lift so we can marry the two and check clearance for the transmission and shifter location. And after a few measurements, we've learned we're going to need to do a few additional modifications to the floor. You can see where I've marked the floor for the shifter of the T56 to pass through, but unfortunately we're going to have to do a little bit more than just cut a small hole. And the reason is the T56 transmission, while it's not overly large, it carries a lot of material above the center line. So we are going to have to do some cutting to get it to fit underneath our C10.
Yeah, we could go ahead and cut the floor out, go out to the metal roller or the English wheel and fab up something really cool. But as you guys know, that takes a lot of time. The cool thing about this era of truck, the four-wheel drives and 1-tons actually came with a bolt-in transmission tunnel. That's much taller. You can see where it goes. That'll probably give us all the clearance we need. So if we can source one somewhere, I think that's the route we're going to take.
Next, a little tunnel vision.
As you can see, we've already cut out our floor to make room for this taller transmission tunnel that our buddy Tommy Bosher sourced for us. But before we weld this thing in there, we've got a couple of issues we need to address. Rust like this is typical on a truck that sits outside for years at a time. Basically what happens is oxygen and moisture in the atmosphere attack the metal, which first turns the steel to this kind of red muddy color. And after time, deterioration starts, which is like what we have here. Now, rust is a form of oxidation, and there are many materials susceptible to that, like aluminum and plastic, for example, both can oxidize. Now, with rust like this, don't let it scare you away from starting or purchasing a project. Rust is easily repairable, and with the automotive aftermarket, they've made it pretty easy for us. Replacement sheet metal is plentiful when it comes to trucks, especially popular ones like our 71 C10. An LMC truck has most every part available for our Chevy, including a bed floor, bed header panel, radiator support, fender wells, cab corners, battery tray. Well, you name it, they've got just about everything. Now, all their parts are stamped to OE specs and are E-coded for protection. Now, for our C10, we had them send us a cab support because, well, as you just saw, ours was gone. This is what you can get into when doing rust repair. Get behind the panel, and sometimes the rust just keeps on going, and the floor is pretty rotten too. Man, that thing's rotted out. Also, someone's been under here and they've done a little patchwork. Now, some people don't have the money to pay a professional or have the knowledge to do a proper repair. Now, this I would not consider a lifetime repair because it looks like they just laid the metal right over the top of the rust. And plus, you can see right here where they burned in a weld, and, well, that's not very safe when your welds just pop off like that. So we'll go ahead and call LMC, get them to send us an inner rocker and the front section of a floor pan. That'll probably take a couple of days to get here, so while we wait on that, we'll go ahead and start working on our transmission tunnel and see if we can get it in the cab. 67 through 72 3/4, 1-ton, and 4-wheel drive trucks came with a raised tunnel section that provided plenty of room for the drivetrain. We sourced this one from a junkyard and it will bolt in nicely. With it sandblasted, the first step is to close this previously cut hole. I'll test fit the new piece and then using the edge of my table, make a small bend to match the tunnel. The next step is to burn it in. I want to leave a 1-inch lip for the tunnel, so I'll pull a couple of measurements and make a few clean cuts. That looks good. Okay, if we were building a show truck, we would go ahead and butt weld this thing in. That way you wouldn't know we put a transmission tunnel in it up top or underneath. But since we want everything to be as accessible as possible because we plan on driving this truck a lot, we're gonna go ahead and bolt the tunnel in. Plus, this is how they did it at the factory, so if it worked for them, it'll work good for us. Once I've got all the holes drilled, I'm using clip nuts and body bolts to secure the tunnel. Now we can make our cut for the new shifter to fit through, and we've made a very easy transmission tunnel upgrade. Perfect.
Next, this differential upgrade is positively cool.
The last place your horsepower goes before it reaches the ground is the rear differential. And we're pretty sure this stock 12-bolt has an open carrier in it, and that just isn't going to cut it with our 460 horsepower LT1. We just can't have any of that one-tire fire. So we're going to show you how to replace the open carrier with a posi so you get the same amount of traction to each wheel and get maximum acceleration. Yep, just as we suspected, open carrier. With the fluid drained from the differential, the teardown begins by removing the center pin from the carrier. The brake drums need a little convincing to come off. Then we can push the axles in to access the C-clips and remove them. Before we go any farther, we need to measure the ring gear backlash so we can duplicate it with a new carrier. I'll mark the bearing caps to make sure they go back in where they came from. To make sure we get both wheels spinning when we're on the gas of our C10, we went ahead and picked up a Yukon Duragrip clutch-style positive traction. It's a 4-spring design that uses Raybestos clutch discs for aggressive operation that'll still drive smoothly when we're on the street. I picked up a shim kit so we can get the backlash where it needs to be, and I already went ahead and pressed on the carrier bearings. So the next step for us is to swap over the ring gear. We're keeping the 373 gears in this truck. They're a good ratio for quick acceleration and low RPM when cruising down the highway. I always use Loctite 243 to make sure the bolts don't back out. And once the ring gear is mated, we can install the carrier. The backlash measures a little loose, so moving some shims will get the carrier closer to the pinion gear. We're shooting for 6/1000ths backlash because that's what we had before. Before we slide those axle shafts into place, we're gonna take care of the stopping power with a little bit of help from Baer brakes. And on the front, we're using their Track 4 system, which comes with these 13-inch drilled and slotted rotors and these beefy 4-piston calipers. We got them powder-coated silver, but you can choose almost any color under the sun. They come with the brackets to mount up to our CPP 2-inch drop spindles and utilize a banjo-style fitting, unlike a lot of other aftermarket calipers, which use pipe thread. When you set them down with our stock single-piston calipers, you can definitely tell the difference. The kit also comes with a new wheel hub that comes pre-assembled with seals, bearings, and even new studs. For the rear, we're using the SS4 kit, which has 12-inch drilled and slotted rotors, slightly smaller 4-piston calipers, and a factory-style parking brake. And we're going to get started by tearing off the old backing plates. The new parking brake bolts up using the factory holes. With the center pin removed, the axles can slide into place with C-clips just like before. Reinstall the center pin and install the cover with RTV silicone. For the new Baer brakes, the rotor slides on, followed by the caliper. For the front, a cotter pin and nut hold on the old hub. With the spindle cleaned up, the new parts fall into place. Well, we've made some great progress on our 71 C10 today. We've got the chassis plumbed out, the engine and trans are back in the frame, and we got a real nice set of brakes and a posi.
Yeah, we've got some sheet metal parts on the way, so the next time you guys see this truck, we're gonna finish up that rust repair, permanently mount the cab, and maybe even show you a new set of wheels and tires.
All right, well, let's get this thing out of here then.
Let's do it.
For the past few months, our 71 C10 has been sitting outside in the warehouse, waiting on new parts to arrive. And as you can see, well, most of them have shown up. So I'm going to show you guys how to build a custom exhaust system that exits through the side of the bed, and we'll take care of some of that last-minute plumbing. But first, we got to get the truck cleaned off and back down to a bare frame.
Let's make this the last time we take this cab off. How about that?
All right, well, let's get this out of here. Every exhaust system starts at the cylinder head, and attached to our LT1 heads from the factory were a set of C7 Corvette style center dump cast iron exhaust manifolds. And we knew right away they weren't going to work for our application because they dumped directly in the middle of our C10's frame. So unless we wanted to cut the frame in half, they just weren't going to work. So I ordered a pair of LT1 swap prototype headers that are designed off of an LS swap header. Now these long tubes, they almost fit. It's actually kind of close, but these last two primary tubes actually interfere with both the starter and the bell housing. So that's really not an option and not worth the effort it would take to move the tubes around and make it work. Now this set of shorty headers, well, that's definitely a step in the right direction. Out of the box, they're very, very close to fitting. Now, this flange almost hit the starter, so I took a little bit of time, I cut off the collector and added this little bit of a kick out to make it clear the starter and give us excellent ground clearance. And we'll start by getting these bolted up. To work well with the 460 horsepower of our LT1, we need to run 3-inch exhaust. So we went to Borla and picked up a stainless Universal Hot Rod Series builder kits, and it starts with these two 5-foot long sections of pipe. The kit also includes 4 180s, 4 90s, and 4 45s, so we'll have more than enough material to get the exhaust from the engine out the back of our C10. Now we also needed some mufflers, so we picked up a set of their crate mufflers. Now they're made from 304 stainless steel, they're directional, and they'll really bring out the sound of our 460 horsepower LT1. And our exhaust starts by making some flanges. Our headers have a 2.5-inch collector flange, so I'm starting with a bare flange connected directly to a 2.5-inch to 3-inch transition. After it's tacked, I will bolt it to the headers. Exact placement is critical here. To connect the muffler to the header, I need to go up and over using 2 45s. I prefer to cut the pipe a few times and sneak up on the finished length, since I don't really have a pipe stretcher in my toolbox. Anytime you're TIGging up an exhaust, surface preparation is very important for a quality, consistent weld. Now, when they manufacture these mandrel bends, the inside of the pipe is actually lubricated to make it stretch easier. But that lubrication will actually ruin your weld. It burns off and just gets all contaminated. So anytime I'm about to start an exhaust project, I use a little bit of acetone and I wipe off the inside and outside of the weld area. It'll dry quickly and remove all that oily residue, making for a nice, clean, consistent weld. 2-inch masking tape holds it in place while tacking. You can buy special clamps to do this, but a $7 roll of tape works just fine for me. With the front pipe tacked together, next I'll check fitment to the collector. And when I'm happy, that also gets tack welded. The entire piece gets checked one last time for perfect alignment. Once it's all welded together, the process gets repeated on the passenger side for a clean, symmetrical look. The biggest challenge when fabricating a bedside exit exhaust is getting the pipes from the inside of the frame rail to the outside. Now there's a couple different ways we can do it, but you can see I actually went over the frame. We also could have cut a hole in the side of the frame, but that's kind of a last resort option. I actually took advantage of a natural space between the bed floor and the frame rail. There's plenty of space to pass the pipes up and over. I need 45 degrees of bend to get above the frame, so I'll take it from this 180. I do need a bit more length on the straight leg, so I'll also tack on an 8-inch long piece of straight pipe to the end. With this Borla exhaust tubing, I'm setting the TIG to 70 amps. One cool tip I've learned about TIG welding is actually in the gloves. I prefer to wear a MIG welding glove on my right hand because that's the hand I hold the torch in, and you often have to set it on a piece of metal that's a little bit warm. And on my left hand, I wear a TIG glove because you can have really fine control of the filler wire. I need a 90-degree bend to get to the top of the frame rail. The stock length works, so it'll get tacked to the first 2 pieces of the tailpipe. On the driver's side, I made a 20-degree sweep to the rear, so to match that, I'll use an angle finder. Do you have to be this precise when you're building an exhaust? Well, no, but a quality finished product is important, so take your time, be patient, and the results will speak for themselves. Well, we've got our tailpipe mocked up, and it does exactly what we need it to do. It clears the bed brace, it clears the bed floor, and it clears the frame with plenty of room to spare on all counts. Now, when we throw the bed back on this truck, we just have to make a small notch in the bottom and add one little tip to this exhaust system, and it's done. Well, minus a little finish welding I have to take care of.
Next, how to get fuel to the LT1.
We're making great progress on our 71 C10 today. We have our stainless steel exhaust all done, and when I put the bed back on, all I have to do is cut a notch and run the exhaust out the side. So now we'll turn our attention to the fuel system. Now most EFI engines require between 40 and 50 pounds of fuel pressure to run properly, but our LT1 is a little bit unique. It needs 70 pounds of pressure at the inlet of the high pressure fuel pump. So we could just run an external electric fuel pump and mount it to the frame, but they're usually very noisy and something you don't want to have to listen to every single day. So we found something better. Because we have a fuel tank that was designed for carbureted applications, we really need more than just a fuel pump. We need a way to hold it inside the tank. And this is the Aeromotive Phantom in-tank fuel system. And the heart of it is this pump that's good for about 700 horsepower. So we know we're covered on our little LT1. It also comes with this trick aluminum fuel hat that has -6 ports for feed, return, and the vent. This system will work with tanks between 6 and 11 inches deep. Plus, optional extenders are available for tanks deeper than that. It also comes with this pretty trick baffle system that'll keep the pump fully submerged in fuel, even under harsh acceleration, cornering, and braking conditions. And the first step for us is to make a hole in that tank. Find a location for the pump in the deepest part of the tank between the baffles. Use a hole saw to cut the opening and deburr the edges. Use the supplied fixture to drill 2 holes, slide in the alignment screws, and drill the remaining holes. Be sure to clean out all the metal shavings from the tank. Measure the depth of the tank and if necessary trim the baffle. Ours was 11 inches deep, so no trimming required. The fixture also acts as a guide to slide in the baffle. Next, slide the retaining ring into the tank and the studs up through the holes. We now have to assemble the pump hanger, and it does have to be trimmed to fit. Mark for the fuel line, cut to length, and attach it with the clamp. Lastly, secure the pump to the hanger. Slide the supplied gasket over the studs, drop in the pump, and tighten it down. Finish up by attaching the fuel line. Well, it's been a productive week at the shop. We've got a brand new exhaust system in the C10, and we finished up the fuel pump.
Yeah, we've got the F100 wired up and all ready to go, and we've got her cut and buffed, and she's looking pretty good. Now, next time you guys see this C10, we're gonna finish up that rust repair we started, get it undercoated, and maybe even do a little painting.
I don't know, you think? That's a little ambitious.
Well, you gonna stay around and help this time?
No, I got greasy hands. I can't touch
strip
paint.
that frame now. You were crying about that the whole time.
Oh, I know, I'm a baby.
Today, custom DIY radiator hoses are within your reach. Plus, cutting away the nasty on our C10 before the cab is married to the frame one last time. That's all right now on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Today we've got our 71 C10 back in the shop, the cab's up on the lift, and we're gonna take care of that 4-letter word that every car guy hates.
Rust. But hey, it's really not that bad.
You sure? You get a couple of big holes here.
Man, don't let that scare you. Now, although there are parts all over this shop, we've actually made a lot of progress on this truck. Now, when it rolled in here, it looked to be a pretty clean truck, but as we dug into it a little bit, not quite good enough. We pulled the cab and started drilling out the spot welds on these cab supports. Well, Mother Nature had really taken its toll on this old girl. Unfortunately, rust is one of the main killers of these old trucks, which is why so many have ended up at the scrapyard. But like I've said before, rust is nothing to be afraid of, especially with how many aftermarket parts are available. Now, there's been quite a bit of work going under this cab by the previous owner, like this inner rocker, which I'll end up replacing, and a couple of cab supports. Now, there are a couple of ways you can go when replacing supports on this era truck. You can go with a direct replacement, which basically means you cut out the old support and burn in a new one. Or you can go with a slip-over panel like the previous owner has done here, which basically is just how it sounds. It slips right over the old support, just reinforcing everything. Now, is this right or is it wrong? It really depends on what you're building, what you plan to do with the truck, and how much time you plan on investing. The problem with this is there's still rust under there. It's not a lifetime repair. That rust is just going to keep on going. So we'll get started back up front and show you how to do it the right way. The first step we're going to take before installing our new cab support is replacing this section of rusty floor directly over it. Making sure to take it far enough back that we'll have good metal to weld to. Now, if you're able to keep it intact, take the section you cut out and use that as a template. We picked up a new driver floor section from LMC Truck, but won't use the entire piece. I'm marking the piece a little bigger than it needs to be. This way, make sure I give us plenty of wiggle room when we get to the truck and we can trace it out and trim it to fit there. This will save a ton of time from having to fab up a new piece from scratch. Got good clean metal to weld to. Now, when I put the new floor section in, I'm actually going to butt weld it to the old floor. Now, I could have cut this piece a little bit bigger, set it over the top of the floor section, and spot welded it in. The only problem with this is we're sandwiching metal together, and I don't like to do that unless it's necessary, because all that's going to do is trap moisture and eventually rust out and you're in the same boat. But sometimes it's necessary, like right here where they spot welded it in from the factory. Now, if you have to stack metal on top of each other, just make sure you use a good weld-through primer. This will prevent corrosion in the future. To mimic the factory spot welds, I'm using a pneumatic punch to make holes in the panel, spacing them about 2 finger widths apart. You can see I'm jumping around using tack welds. This way I'm not creating too much heat that could warp the metal. I like to use a body hammer to finesse the piece so it lines up perfectly. Also, when you do these kind of repairs, make sure you fully weld the piece in. I've seen so many repairs where people just tack the piece in, then seam seal or fiberglass the seam left behind. Next, I'm knocking down the welds with a 3-inch 36 grit roll lock on an angle grinder. But don't grind away all of your weld. You want to leave as much as you can for strength. Next up is the cab support. Now, since I'm only replacing a section, I'll measure, then cut to length. Yeah, I think that'll work. Since we're putting 2 pieces of metal together, it's very important to use weld-through primer here. This will prevent any future corrosion. Vice grips will hold it into place while I make a few tacks. And here's a tip for you. For a tight gap to the floor section, I'll use a few sheet metal screws to hold the piece in place. Then I can burn it in. Well, got everything taken care of up front, no more rust, and not only that, the truck's gonna be a whole lot safer with these repairs. Now, unfortunately, I've got a little more rust to deal with under this truck, so I may be here a minute.
Next, LT will show us how our C10's gonna keep it on the cool side.
Our LT1 engine has been between the frame rails of our C10 for a few months now, and we're ready to turn our attention to the cooling system. And that starts with a place to mount the radiator. Now, our old core support has seen better days. It's heavily rusted underneath the battery tray, the hardware is gone, and along the way, somebody got kind of creative and they cut off the headlight mounts and they welded the buckets directly to the core support. So in its current state, it's really not going to work for us. Now, we could have taken the time, made the repairs, painted it, and got it ready to go, but it's just not worth the effort, especially when you consider you can buy a brand new core support for $190 from LMC Truck. Now, normally these come with E-coat, but we already went ahead and we scuffed this and we shot it with a single-stage urethane paint in satin black. We also went ahead and picked up a mount kit that comes with all the bushings and hardware to get it mounted to the truck. So why is new hardware so important? Well, flashing back at what secured the original core support, you can see we had no choice. The bushings were dry rotted and cracked, and the bolts were rusted away. New mounting kits are cheap and make for an easy install. Once everything is tightened down, we're ready for the next step. Now that we have a place to mount it, we need a radiator that'll bring down the temperature of the coolant and send it on its way back to the engine. So we turned to Holley and grabbed one of their aluminum TIG-welded frostbite radiators. Now this 28-inch wide 4-row core will have no trouble keeping our LT1 cool. And this is actually designed for 67 to 72 C10s with an LS swap. But because our Street Shop accessory drive actually uses an LS3 water pump, this will work perfect for us, and it bolts right in the factory location. The rad drops in and is held down with the original brackets. Oftentimes the most difficult part of completing an engine swap is plumbing the cooling system. Usually the ports on the new engine are in a different spot, they're a different size, and your original hoses just won't line up. So there are a couple of different options that you can take to get the coolant from the engine to the radiator and back again. And the first one is just plain getting lucky. Sometimes the original hose or the hose from the donor engine will work. It has a nice factory style, the bends are molded in, and it just looks nice and clean. Plus, if you ever blow a hose, you know exactly where to go to get one to replace it. The second option would be to take a piece of welding wire or an old coat hanger and bend it in the shape that you need for your new hose. You can then take this down to your local auto parts store and nicely ask to go into the back room and see their selection of radiator hoses. And more often than not, you can actually find one that'll fit perfectly for your application. It might be from a Kia or a Honda, but hey, it'll work. Now the third option would be to find a universal flexible radiator hose. This stuff is available in rubber or metal, and it bends pretty easily to get the fluid from point A to point B. And this stuff is great for people who don't have access to a welder. For our C10, we're actually going to build some radiator hoses out of hardline. So we went to Vibrant Performance and picked up a couple of these 1.5" and 1.75" bends. They're made from polished 6061 aluminum, and this stuff welds super nice. Then to make connections at the engine and radiator, we'll use a couple of these 4-ply reinforced silicone couplers. Now building a custom radiator hose is actually a lot easier than it sounds, and we'll show you how to get started up top. I'll slide an 1.5" silicone coupler onto the upper radiator. Then I can start by measuring the first tube and cutting it down. My 1.5" 90 will meet up with this 45 that will connect straight to the water pump. I like to use the bandsaw to cut the tube, but a fine-tooth hacksaw also works great on this aluminum. I'll deburr the cut ends with a hand file. A power sander could make quicker work of the aluminum, but it's easy to take too much away. With both pieces trimmed, I'll check the fitment and mark the alignment. Over at the welding table, it's important to clean the inside of the joint with acetone to remove any contaminants. Masking tape holds the two pieces together. I will tack both sides and clean the outside of the joint with acetone before final welding. The lower radiator hose is much quicker to make. We got lucky. A single 1.75" 45-degree bend will work perfectly once we cut it to the right length. The coolant tubes for our C10 are nearly done, but we need a way to prevent the coupler from slipping off. Now I could just add a bunch of weld on the end of the pipe, and that would work, but a cleaner way would be to form a bead directly in the end, and Vibrant Performance has just the tool for the job. We grabbed ours from Summit Racing, and we use it all the time on steel and aluminum, just like this cold air intake I built for the C10. Now the bead roller is especially useful when you're building turbocharged pipes or other pressurized connections, because the formed bead actually acts like a barb, preventing the silicone from sliding off even when under pressure. It works similar to a pipe cutter. Tighten the screw a bit and crank the handle. All it takes is a few turns to form a perfect bead. And once all our tubes are done, we'll install them in the truck for good. Standard hose clamps will secure the connection. Yeah, I could have made a store-bought hose work, but for less than an hour's work, we have 2 custom coolant tubes and the satisfaction of doing it yourself.
Ahead, a line of paint that won't break the bank.
Now Now, when you guys were sitting at home on the couch, I went ahead and cut out the rest of this rust and replaced all this bad repair work with new metal. So now I can start prepping the underside of the cab for the new material. We need to get rid of all this dirt, grime, and factory undercoating so our new material will get good adhesion, last for a lot of years. There's a few tools you can use to accomplish this. Grinder, assortment of wire wheels, and a scraper. Now this is what I usually prefer because the wire wheels will get into the hard to reach areas, and sometimes if you get lucky and the undercoating's still soft, you can scrape it right off. But looks like ours has gotten kind of hard, but we'll give it a shot and see what it does. I like using a scraper because it's a lot less messy. That grinder throws debris everywhere, and the next thing you know, your shop's covered in dust. A little heat from a propane torch will help soften up any factory undercoating. Look at that. Making it much easier to scrape off. I will, however, use a small wire wheel on an angle grinder to get into the tight corners that the scraper can't reach. If you're wondering why you have to pay so much money when you send your truck out to have it built, well, it's because the person you're paying has to go through this. I need a shower. I'll lay out some tape lines and seam seal all the places where we put metal to metal, like our cab supports where they meet the floor. This will keep moisture from getting in the support, preventing any rust from forming again. Now we're ready for our Duplicolor rust barrier. Now you can actually apply this right over bare metal and rust. It'll seal in the corrosion and stop rust from ever forming again. Now if I know metal's gonna sit bare for any amount of time, I'll usually go ahead and etch prime it, but with this product, you don't even need it. You can apply this with a brush, a roller, or an HVLP gun. With the cab masked and wiped down, I can get started. Now I like to use a primer gun for this with a large tip like a 2.0 because this is some thick stuff. Now you can tell by just how heavy the can is. But if you don't have a gun with a tip that big, you can reduce it down with acetone by 10%. I like to spray this at about 30 psi with about a 50% overlap, and I'll spray about 4 coats. And it's recommended to do no less than 2 coats. Duplicolor rust barrier will seal in any corrosion left behind. It's impact resistant by being rubberized and will deflect any debris from beating up the bottom of our cab. Now, as you can see before, our C10 had holes in the floor that you could nearly stick your hand through. But now we've got all that cut out and replaced with brand new metal, and she's solid. Now, remember, this is going to be a daily driver, so it doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to preserve it so it'll last for a lot of years, get this thing back down on the frame and bash on it, not have to worry about it. Since we have our cab off the frame, this will be a great time to go ahead and paint the firewall.
Some mice living in there.
We have all new parts going in, like a steering column and hydro boost, so we can remove all this old junk. We can start out by wet sanding with 400 grit sandpaper and red scuff pads. Down low, we have just a little bit of surface rust, so I'll knock that down with 180 grit on a DA. Then we can get it off the lift and around the corner to our dedicated paint booth. We'll mask it up, protected from any overspray. And a little rust treatment where I ran the DA will make sure none of this nasty rust returns. Now, I know this looks like a lot of products just to paint a firewall, but actually we've got bigger plans for this truck, but you'll have to wait to find out about that. But for what we're doing today in the paint booth, we went to Summit Racing and picked up some of their epoxy primer, which we'll lay down first, followed by a flame red base coat and reducer, and then to go along with that kind of sleeper look we're going for, some hot rod satin clear. We'll get started with a primer. With the cab wiped down and tacked off, I can lay down 1 coat of the epoxy primer. After a 30-minute flash time, we can lay down the flame red. Now, I've got something special planned for this C10, but the finish won't look new. Matter of fact, this truck will have a durable paint job, but look like it's been sitting in a cornfield for about 30 years.
Next, out of the booth and onto the frame.
Well, we've got our 71 C10 out of the paint booth and back in the shop. We've got the firewall all freshened up with that satin paint job. We've got the bottom of the cab metal worked and undercoated, and it's ready to sit back down on the frame.
We've done a lot of work beforehand to get this chassis ready to go. It's got a full fuel system, the frame's been painted, we've got a full exhaust, and the engine and trans are sitting permanently in their home. I even took the time to install the Pace Performance wiring harness for our LT1, and the cooling system's done as well as the cold air intake. So basically we have a running and driving chassis that's ready to go.
Now, the reason we went ahead and installed everything, built exhaust, wired it up, and that whole deal is if this truck were assembled and we tried to do that, we'd be crawling under the truck, in the engine compartment, up on the lift, and back down on the floor, everywhere, man. So we actually saved a ton of time to go ahead and do it this way, and I think we start putting it together.
Let's roll this underneath.
Let's do it.
This is always my most favorite part of a project, is when you get a cab that comes down on the frame. It's like the sign of progress.
All sentimental.
You get that sense of accomplishment. You're like, oh man, this is like watching your child being born or something like that.
You're
Don't
weird.
show that to my wife.
You're weird.
Yeah, I am.
Now, I didn't just pick flame red for this truck because I like the color. This is actually what this truck would have came with in 1971, or pretty darn close to it.
Now that may be, but what'd you call the color?
Red, man.
Now, what color is this?
That's red.
What color's the roof?
That's red.
And you think that's red?
And you know there's more than one shade of red, right?
I
Are you
guess.
colorblind or anything like that? May need to get you checked out. Now, what I was teasing you guys with earlier was the way we're gonna paint this truck. We're actually gonna do a patina paint job on it. We're gonna lay down some red oxide primer. We're gonna cover it with the flame red, sand through it everywhere the sun would have beat this thing down back in the day, and make it look old with a brand new finish.
Well, that's another show for another time.
Absolutely.
Let's finish this cab.
You're helping me this time, though. Got a lot of sanding for you to do.
Does your bed look like this? We'll show you how to refurbish one for under $1,500. Plus, our C10 is back for custom metal fab, a fresh interior, and exhaust cutouts. That's all today on Truck Tech.
We've got our 71 C10 back in the shop, and we're making progress every single day. We've got the LT1 installed in the frame rails. It's wired up and sitting pretty. The cab's back on the frame, and it's sitting on airbags down to the ground.
And I've started some of the paint work. Now, last time you guys saw this truck, I showed a simple two-stage paint job on the firewall and have since jammed out the cab and sprayed the dash in the same flame red. And that's all before the truck gets a brand new interior today. Well, what do you think of the color?
You know, I like the color a lot, but I'm still not so sure on the name. I mean, red, really?
Yeah, well, for the name Flame Red, it's about as orange as you can get, but especially when you compare these two side by side, that's so deep of a red that
There is a lot of
orange.
contrast there, yeah. Well, either way, I really like the color. I think the truck's gonna look awesome when it's done. And you guys remember that old rusted out bed floor we found when we tore the truck down? Well, today I'm gonna show you how to fix that. Now, for less than $1,500, we'll get a brand new bed floor in, new header panel, and we'll throw a DIY bed liner on there to protect that new investment.
But before we get to all that, we'll go back here and throw some sparks.
Watch out for that gas tank.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not there anymore. The first thing to do is to get rid of this old fuel filler rubber and get down to bare clean metal. I'm doing this by using an angle grinder with a 3-inch 36 grit roll-off. Next, using a piece of chipboard and a fine tip Sharpie, I can trace out the fuel hole. Chipboard is perfect for making templates like this. It takes shape easily and it's very easy to work with. Now, you can normally order it on the internet, and it's always good to have around the shop. Now we can take the cutout piece and transfer it to 20 gauge steel. Let's see, let's go in a corner. I'll make cuts on the bandsaw, then I'll fine tune it with a belt sander. Back at the truck, I can start fitting the metal to the filler hole. Pretty darn close right there. Keep in mind, this 20 gauge bends very easily, and the bend we need is right here on the truck. So take advantage of that and make your bend using the truck as a guide. Now that I'm happy with the fitment, we can burn it in using tack welds bouncing around on the panel, giving it time to cool between welds. Then I can grind it down with the angle grinder and it's ready for filler work. Now, this custom touch only took about 40 minutes to do. All shaven.
The interior of our C10 is in desperate need of some attention. The previous owner tried to make his own door panels. He sewed together some black and red vinyl in a flame pattern over a plywood backing. And as much as we like the look, well, it doesn't really match with anything we have planned for the rest of the truck. So they gotta go. And we went to year one to start over. And we grabbed some OE replacement door panels. They're made from black embossed vinyl with this intricate scroll work on the bottom and sides, as well as this wood grain inlay up top. But my favorite part about these door panels is they're made from vacuum formed ABS plastic, and they hold their shape much better than the fiberboard backed originals. We also picked up a couple of accessories to finish the installation of the door panels, like the window cranks, door handles, and even some armrest. To complete the installation up front, we grabbed a new dash pad, and to keep our feet nice and cozy, we grabbed an 80/20 loop carpet. And that's where we're going to start our installation. Because we converted to a manual transmission,
It looks better already.
and had to use the larger factory trans tunnel, we ordered our carpet for a four-wheel drive application. It fits perfectly with a taller floor profile. Once the carpet is centered, we'll use a razor blade to make the first hole for the shifter. After that, we'll cut holes for things like seat belts, the seat mounts, and this hole in the floor for the engine control module harness to pass through. Next up are the door panels. We'll start by mounting the chrome retaining trim up top with the provided hardware. On the bottom of the door, there are normally some threaded bosses welded to the metal. But over the years, ours have broken off and we need to make our own holes. Use some masking tape and a Sharpie to mark where the holes will go in all 4 locations. Mount the door panel and center it front to back. Use an 1/8" bit to drill a hole through the door panel and the door at the same time, and install the screw. Once all 4 holes are drilled, remove the panel and take off the tape, then install the panel for good. Next up, I'll install the armrest.
Looks better already.
Those are held on with 2 screws. And before I install the window crank, I'll roll the window all the way up and line up the handle so it points up, giving maximum leg room. Then the door handle goes on. And the interior is already looking a lot better. The dash pad looks great and installs quickly with nuts from the backside and screws out front. We'll install our year 1 headliner without the chrome trim for a clean look by gluing it to the ceiling. These adjustable hood props will hold it temporarily in place until the glue dries. When we picked up our C10 project, we did a preliminary inspection for rust, as you always do. So we peeked our heads underneath the bed to see what we could find. And for the most part from below, it actually looked pretty solid. But when we tore the truck down and removed the plastic bed liner, well, we were in for a bit of a surprise. This bed floor was trashed. Now, why did we miss such an obvious problem when it looked so fine underneath? Well, I guess that just goes to show you always want to pull a bed liner out. But one thing you notice, this rust is in lines straight across, and directly underneath are some bed supports. Now what's happened is the bed supports cause a natural place for dirt and moisture to collect. The dirt and moisture start causing rust, and it just slowly eats itself away. And before you know it, well, you've got that. So now that we're in this mess, how do we get out of it? Well, as always, there's a couple different options. We could cut some squares out, we could make a patch and weld this all together, but that's a ton of time. You know, we could take the easy way out and just bed line over it and stuff some foam or newspaper in there, but that's just not what we do. So we went to LMC, we grabbed a new bed floor, and we're actually going to disassemble this bed and bolt it all back together with a brand new sheet metal. We'll start by removing the tailgate. The fasteners for the bed side are removed from underneath, on the inside edge of the wheel well, and up the front edge by the header panel. It's a good idea to hang on to these bolts so they can be reused. An overnight soak in Evapo-Rust rust remover will clean them up. Next, the stock wheel wells have to go. Many of the original carriage bolts are rusted, and the square heads of the bolts spin so the nut won't loosen. While you could cut these off underneath, a cleaner way is to grind the head of the bolt down until you start to see the outline of the square shoulder. Then, a quick hit with a punch will get the remainder of the bolt out of the way. With the driver's bedside removed, we can discard the old rusted bed floor and swap it with a new one.
Thanks, man.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
Because we'll be coating the inside of the bed, there are a few spots that'll be easier to prep with the bed sides removed. I use a wire wheel to remove the bulk of the surface rust along the seam lines, and a DA with 80 grit to sand the painted areas inside the bed. I'll then wipe down the areas with some prep spray and get ready to hit them with some Duplicolor bed coating. Well, it's been a lot of dirty work, but we've got our bed 100% torn down and that rusty bed floor is out of here. We're ready to start reassembling. We also picked up a new header panel from LMC because our old one was pretty well dented up, and we've come this far, so why not? It took a little bit extra time, but we prepped and coated the insides of these bed panels. All these areas would be very difficult to access once the bed is fully put together. So that just goes to show, if you plan your project thoroughly from start to finish, you can save yourself a lot of hassle in the long run. Bumpus! We bought this header panel, a new bed floor, and tailgate from LMC Truck. They're OE quality stamped from 18 gauge steel and licensed by GM Restoration Parts. They'll all bolt on just like the original pieces, and the time we saved by not having to body work our bed was well worth it. Well, we've got our bed 100% bolted together, and let me tell you what, it's a night and day difference over that old rusted bent up sheet metal. It cost us about $1,500 in parts, but all said, it's a whole lot easier than trying to weld in patches over that old rusted metal. Now I have to prepare the surface of this new sheet metal for the coating that we have yet to come. So I've got a DA and some 180 grit paper and some red scuff pads for the hard to reach areas. Got a little bit of work ahead of me.
Next, a custom touch to make your exhaust flow.
We're back on Truck Tech. Now, while LT puts another coat of spray-on bed liner in our C10's box, I'm going to address these gauges. Now, this stock cluster, it's in pretty decent shape, but after looking at the backside, well, somebody's been in here. I don't know what the world they were trying to do, but it's a mess. Now, although the tack probably worked, it's kind of hard to justify the amount of time it would take to go back and restore all these gauges and make sure they work properly. So the best option for us was to go back to year one and pick up a new gauge set. Now, since we like the stock look so much, we went back with the black and chrome cluster, and we have all the necessary gauges to make sure that our engine is running safely, along with speedometer, tack, and fuel gauge. With everything hooked up, just a few screws hold the gauges in place. Now, they look clean up against our new satin paint.
What do you think, man? Got the bed all painted up? I think it looks pretty good.
It's looking good, man. It's getting there.
Hey, at least it's all one color now, right?
Get it on the truck and try to finish that exhaust up.
Grab that thing for me.
Yeah, I guess I'll help you.
Do your side.
Still good?
Yep.
Yeah, this sure beats using a cherry picker.
We'll get the truck up in the air. And after a little discussion, we're going to cut a notch in the bed for our side exit exhaust, as opposed to a hole. This way, the bed will be much easier to remove later on. A little flames help with our inspiration. I'll tape off my cut marks. That'll act as a guide. 2 minutes later, with a cutoff wheel, we can check the fitment. I like that. It'll look good.
You know, it's important to do these two operations at the same time when you're doing anything custom like this, because you can't finalize one until they're both exactly where you need them to be. So if I welded this exhaust in and Jeremy cut the hole just a little bit off, well, he'd be mad at me and that wouldn't work. So he's going to get the hole finalized and I'll get the pipe finalized before we do any welding. And speaking of welding, what are you going to weld?
Yeah, I think I'm going to do a little more work. Now, we could go ahead and finish this out, paint it, and it'd look good, it'd work. But to me, that's an unfinished edge, so I'll show you what we're going to do. I'll put a 3-inch exhaust pipe in the vise. Then take some 3/16 steel rod and use the radius to make the bend around the pipe. Back at the truck, I'll use my angle grinder to get down to bare metal, so I have a clean surface to weld to. A pair of vice grips holds the rod in place. This is just one of those little custom touches you can do to your truck that your buddies at the Show and Shine will notice. I start in the center and bend the rod as I go. Now, the reason I didn't bend it completely to shape off the truck is it would have taken way longer. Plus, the weld actually heats up the rod, making it easier to manipulate. Now that it's fully welded, I can cut off the excess rod and start grinding my welds with 36 grit on a grinder and a die grinder with a carbide bit.
Well, man, that looks pretty good. Let's get this tip on and marked.
All right.
And then we can weld it. This is gonna be tricky, just so you know. Get everything lined up.
Dang, that looks good. Now, I've been teasing you guys for a little while now about the patina paint job I've had planned for the C10, and the time is finally here to lay it all down. Now, all the body panels were in pretty decent shape, and after doing a little digging on the cab, I found that the truck had only been painted one time through the years. Now, that's good for us because it means we didn't have to strip anything down to bare metal. Now, for the patina, I want the truck to appear authentic, like it's still wearing its factory paint that's just been beat down by the sun. And I'll show you guys step by step how to accomplish this. Now, I went ahead and scuffed all the panels up and laid down this red-brown primer, which is close to what the truck would have come with from the factory. Now, we can get started with base coat. Summit Racing Flame Red Base mixes 2-to-1 with reducer and takes a cap full of clear coat activator for every 32 ounces mixed. I'll do a quick check on the wall and make sure the gun is all set up. Now, this particular base sprays really nice at around 30 psi. And since I plan on sanding through a lot of this new base coat for the look we're going for, I'm only going to lay down 2 coats, keeping it thin. So I'll move a little quicker than normal. And where the sun would have baked on this truck the most, I'll barely cover the top of the bed rails and of course the hood, since these areas will appear most weather beaten. Okay, we've got 1 coat down, and I'm gonna try something a little different on the hood. Now, when the truck was painted at the factory, they usually use like a 50% overlap, consistent passes. Well, obviously, when you overlap paint, some areas will be thicker than others. So as the years go by and the sun beats down on the hood, it's gonna eat away the lighter spots first, leaving a streakiness. I'm gonna mimic that on this hood. I've let the base coat sit for a few hours, so we're ready to start sanding on it. Now, right out of the gun where I kept it light, we've already got a pretty cool patina going, but I want to take it a little bit further. Now, when I do these types of paint jobs to get this effect, there's a few steps that I go through. I'll start off with 400 grit paper, swap to 6, and then I finish off with 800 grit. So, go ahead and get started with 400 grit, a little bit of water. I like to use a soft block hitting all of the places the sun would have beat down on the truck. And if any of you guys have ever sanded on base coat, you know it will clog up your sandpaper pretty easily. So a good tip when doing this is add a couple of drops of soap to your water. It will help sand a little easier and keep your sandpaper clog free. And I'm sanding in a sweeping motion the length of the panel. I'm not using the common X pattern like you're probably used to hearing me talk about. After all, we're not going for perfection here. Now, we can go ahead and lose the block, swap over to 600 grit, and there's no rules for what you can do here. There's many ways to accomplish this. It's just whatever you're looking for.
But you're telling me if I see bare metal, I've gone too far?
Don't go to bare metal. Well, you know what? I guess if you do go to bare metal, real patina then, right?
How hard is this to spot in?
We'll just let it rust over. I'll tell you one, this is my favorite type of paint job. I didn't have to do any body work. This is pretty simple to do. Go online and look up some vintage original trucks and see how they've aged. You'll see that there are a lot of common areas on these trucks that are faded down to primer, and you can try to mimic that look or just do whatever looks cool to you. We're back on Truck Tech in the home stretch, completing a Fauxtina paint job on our C10. I'll swap to 800 grit and go back over the areas where we got down to primer. Of course, we're faking 30 years of sun wear. We just don't want it to look fake. I think I would refer to this paint job as a California patina. Truck with no rust. Just been beat up by the sun a little bit, always in good weather.
Do you prefer the 20 or the 30-year vintage, though? I prefer the 30-year myself.
We'll go with 30-year on this.
It's a good vintage.
I'm using the original primer color underneath and the flame red base coat to age this truck as if it had just been painted one time. But what if your truck already has really nice paint? It's good and straight, and it's the color you want. Well, then you don't want to take the time and sand the whole truck down and put it all in red primer like I did. There's an easier way to do it. I'll show you how on this fender. With the panel ready, I'll rattle can a couple of coats of red primer over the areas you know the sun would have eaten up the paint. Once cured, use the same sanding steps I showed you with the other method. By wet sanding with 400, then 600, and finish with 8. And there you go. Just like that, you have the same look, just reversed, but no one will ever know the difference. With everything back in the booth, we're ready for clear. I'm using Summit Racing's Hot Rod Satin Clear. It mixes 4-to-1 with an activator. Now this clear will keep with the authentic look we're trying to achieve. It will also give the truck good UV protection. So we're able to have that old look, but with a very durable finish. I'll finish up by laying down 3 coats.
With the last coat of clear finally dry, we'll roll the C10 back into the shop, throw on the bed, and throw on a front fender so we can take a step back and admire our work.
Well, we've made a huge dent in our C10. We've got the truck all patinaed out and it's looking really cool. I even showed you guys a couple of different ways you can get this effect. Now, what I really like about this paint job is it's really easy to do and it's very inexpensive. So, hey, if you don't like it, it's all right. You can go back, do a little more, or paint the truck solid if you want to.
Absolutely. This is just another one of those projects. I mean, this whole truck has been something you can do at home without that many special tools. But hold on a second.
What do you got over there?
Check this out. Got some new jewelry in.
Oh, man.
20-inch rally replicas.
Yep, original look, more modern size, man, that'll look good.
Absolutely.
I hope you've ordered a lot of tires because we're gonna need them.
Definitely.
Back in the day, if you wanted a cheap tuck and roll upholstery job, south of the border was the place. Today, we'll show you a cheater version you can craft for your own rod. Plus, we're back on the C10 where little things mean a lot.
Welcome to Truck Tech. We're pumped to finally get a day to finish up some details on our Patina C10 project as we get a little bit closer to getting this baby back on the road.
You know, we have a lot of exterior dress up yet to do because we have no grille, no bumper, headlights, marker lights. We don't even have any glass in this thing. So there's a long way to go to get this thing roadworthy again.
And for you guys that love to hang out in your garage or your man cave, we've got something a little bit different to show you today.
I'd say a lot of bit different.
Yeah.
But first, let's get started on the front of this thing and make it look like a 71 C10 again.
Let's
What do you
do
say?
it.
We do have all of our original C10 parts kicking around from when we tore it down last fall. But take a look at these bumpers. The chrome is starting to pit, they're dented, they're twisted, and they just aren't going to cut it for us. Yeah, we are going for a Patina style truck, but we want it to have just a little bit of class. So we started over and gave our truck a little bit of bling, and that begins out front with this new grille shell. It comes preloaded with this billet insert that gives it just a little bit of a custom touch without being too over the top. We then grabbed a pair of new chrome bumpers. Yeah, we could have had our original ones straightened out, restored, and re-chromed, but it's really not worth the expense on a driver like the truck that we're building. All it took was one phone call to Brothers Trucks, and we got all the parts that you see here. Next, we grabbed some of their new LED lights. These things will be brighter and a lot more reliable than the old incandescent style. Not only that, the new lenses look 100 times better than the 45-year-old originals. And our installation starts up front with some new headlight buckets. Start with the plastic thread adapters and slide in the spring. Thread in each of the screws about halfway, then slide in the bucket and attach the spring. The headlight is held in with a new retaining ring. In order to support the grille, we need to install the hood latch and support bracket. Then, the new grille can be installed, followed by the headlight bezels. Well, the next thing to go on would be the new front bumper, but these stock brackets, they're just not going to cut it. So we need to make a quick stop at the blaster. Whether you use a blast cabinet like this one or sandpaper and a wire brush, the goal is all the same. Remove as much rust as you can to give the paint a good surface to stick to. With the paint dry, the two upper brackets are first installed onto the bumper. Then, the whole thing is set onto the frame and tightened down. Out back, the bumper brackets are first to go on, which have also been prepped and painted. Then the license plate box gets bolted on. You know, it's amazing what a huge difference the small details can make on your project. I mean, a brand new chrome bumper is nice, but if it's bolted to rusty brackets, well, that just kind of ruins it for you. There's nothing worse than going to a car show and looking underneath a freshly painted vehicle and seeing rust and dirt. It takes a little bit more time, but in the end, you'll have a much nicer finished product. With the bolts trimmed to length, we'll install the bumper and tighten it all down. LED lights have recently become mainstream.
Now I've painted these black because we're using an LED, but if you're using an incandescent bulb, this needs to be painted silver or white so the light has some more reflection to make it a little bit brighter. The reason why is these LEDs have their own reflector built inside.
Many new vehicles leave the factory these days equipped with LEDs. And advantages are many. Light-emitting diodes are brighter over conventional bulbs. They consume a lot less power and have a longer lifespan. Plus, they give our 45-year-old truck a much-needed modern touch.
Now you may be looking at this wondering, did I wire that in backwards? No, actually on these LEDs, the black wire is actually the power wire and the white wire is the ground.
With the grounds properly attached, the light can sit in its new home. Well, in just a couple hours' time, we were able to completely transform the outside of our C10, and it didn't even cost that much money. I mean, think about it. We've got two new chrome bumpers, a new grille, and a few lights. Plus, we saved even more money by cleaning up and repainting all of our old brackets. Now, the last detail that's going to finish off the outside of this truck is the chrome trim that goes around the taillight. But ours is stuck in the mail, so we'll throw it on when it shows up.
Next, turning a tired bench seat into a cool couch for your man cave.
We're back on Truck Tech, and I'm really digging our new piece of shop equipment, this Conso 206 RB5 sewing machine. And we've got some cool projects lined up for next season where I can put this thing to good use, creating some cool custom upholstery. But that got me to thinking. Earlier this season, Mark Chris from the Detroit Muscle Show got creative with an old small block Chevy that had been laying around their shop. He stripped it down, cleaned it up, slapped on a little paint, and built an engine block coffee table that sits in our front office, next to a boring black Corinthian leather couch. So I thought, what can we do to add to that vibe to give the lobby a little bit more of a hot rod feel? Well, we could throw some custom paint on the walls, maybe even build a cool sign to hang on the wall, but then it hit me. How about a unique couch made from something out of the junkyard? Actually, we picked up this front bench seat out of a '49 Cadillac Fleetwood. We're gonna turn this thing into a couch. Now, I'm gonna tell you, it is huge. You could easily fit 3 people on this thing. And the plans I have for it, I'm thinking a red vinyl up top and along the facing of the cushion. And for the inserts, we'll do a white vinyl and something cool like tuck and roll. Now, since the lower cushion is solid and it doesn't have this upper strip, I think we'll add a 4 or 5 inch red strip in here that goes into the tuck and roll and make it match a little better. But we'll get started with a cushion. The first thing we need to do before tearing the seat down is very important. I'm going to find the center of the cushion, then make lines about 6 inches apart where each piece of material is sewn together. The lines are where we will make our witness marks, which are references used to sew our new material back to its proper location. If we didn't make these marks, I'd struggle to get all the pieces lined back up. Now I'm going to measure and mark for the red vinyl insert. This will be my cut line. Next is to remove the seat cover, typically held down with hog rings. You can cut them off with a pair of wire cutters or shears. With the cover off the seat, now it's time to separate all the pieces with a razor blade. Now this can be a little time consuming, but this is a good test of patience. You don't want to just tear it apart and ruin the material. Destroying the material means your template will be cattywampus. Not a good thing. All right, since our cover is so torn up and I want to try to keep it together as good as I can for a template, I'm just going to tape over some of these spots, try to hold it together. Now I can make my cut to separate the two pieces. Remember, the piece on the left will be flat red vinyl. On the right, our white tuck and roll. All right, this is our insert that's going to get tuck and roll. And this is what tuck and roll looks like. It looks really cool because all of the stitches are hidden. Now, I call each one of these channels, and our insert, I get about 40 of them. Now, when you sew tuck and roll, it tends to shrink a lot. So for every 4 channels, we're gonna lose about 1 inch. So I'm gonna cut my material way bigger than it needs to be. And once we get it all sewn up, we can come back, lay our insert over the top of our tuck and roll, trace it out, we're good to go. First, I can cut out the white vinyl and get it to a manageable size. Then the same with the scrim foam. 2 coats of 3M trim adhesive on both sides will hold it together nicely. Now we can lay out the lines to sew the pleats, starting with the absolute center. I'll make my marks 2 inches wide, which happens to be the width of my ruler. Over to the machine, I can begin laying down stitches. All I'm doing is making a top stitch on the material following each of my lines I just marked. These lines of stitches will end up being our guides for the next step. After about an hour or so running a stitch on all the pleats, I can start with the actual stitch that provides the tuck and roll effect. It starts by folding the material right where the stitch lines are, and I'm sewing a 1/4 inch to the inside all the way down the material. More patience in play here. These are the actual stitches your butt will rest on, so they better be straight. All right, now you can see what our finished product is going to look like. Now the technique I'm using here, a lot of people call this cheater tuck and roll because it's a little bit different from the traditional tuck and roll they did back in the day. Back then, they would take leather or vinyl material, sew it to another fabric backing. This would leave the channels open. They would then stuff each individual channel with cotton. Now, that takes a lot of time to do, so doing it this way is much more efficient. And if you put the two side by side, you can't tell a difference, so I definitely prefer this way. Once the last channel is sewn, I can move on to the next step. With the old insert laid down on the new piece, I'll transfer my alignment marks. Then cut it to size. These witness marks are made on the outer edge of the tuck and won't be seen, but they will help me line everything up. Moving on to the front panel, I'll lay out the old piece and transfer it over to the red. The process is the same here, transferring marks to help line everything up. An extra 1/2 inch to the top for seam allowance will give us plenty of material to sew to when we stitch the two pieces back together. At the machine, I'm running a border stitch right along the edge of the material just to lock the foam and vinyl together. Now this stitch will never be seen, and we can follow the same steps for the facing material. We're back on Truck Tech, resurrecting and converting this original 49 Cadillac bench seat into a nice tuck and rolled couch for our front lobby. The assembly of our pieces is pretty simple. I'm sewing the two inserts together, laying them face to face, making sure to keep the edges even. And I've lined up the stitch a 1/2 inch in on all the pieces. Now this 1/2 inch is referred to as seam allowance. Now, don't get me wrong, upholstery is definitely a learned skill, but it's something that anyone can do with a little practice and a decent sewing machine. Oh, and don't forget patience. Most folks are intimidated by sewing machines, but in my opinion, running the machine is probably the easiest part of the job. Buy a good used machine, get some material, and go to town. Now, the web is a great resource for how-to videos, along with our show, of course. Tuck and roll looks pretty cool. Oh, one down, one to go.
One of the more important systems that we haven't installed in our C10 yet is the steering column. And there's two main reasons why I'm not going to put this one back in our truck. First of all, it was originally a column shift, and there's a lot of stuff here that we just don't need anymore. Now that's really not a deal breaker, but this is. The bearing at the bottom is completely shot, and that's a safety concern which we don't want to mess around with. So we went to LMC Truck and we're going to completely start over with this new black steering column. And right away it looks a lot better because it's for a floor shift truck, so there's no ugly bumps on the side. We also grabbed everything we'll need to complete our installation, like this black billet aluminum and leather steering wheel, all the adapters we'll need, as well as this new steering shaft with joints at either end. So we'll have tight, precise steering and we won't have any safety concerns. Our installation starts right away by sliding the column down into the hole and lining up the retaining strap. Down near the firewall, I'll slide in the rubber grommet and screw in the bracket. In the engine bay, the lower column bracket goes into place with a couple bolts. Back inside, it's time to install the steering wheel. I cheated and already lined up the steering shaft with the wheels pointing straight. But if your steering wheel is crooked when driving down the road, there are infinite adjustments with this type of splined adapter, so it's easy to correct later on. Back under the hood, slide the universal joint onto the column, then the rag joint onto the steering box. I already drilled pockets for the set screws to engage, and with everything lined up, apply Loctite to each set screw. You really don't want any of your hardware on your steering system loosening up.
I went ahead and progressed the project. I've sewn the backrest together and everything's coming together pretty nicely. But there's one thing I still needed to add, and that's what we call a listing. It's basically one piece of material that's folded over and sewn together. It gives me a channel to run a piece of rod through. Now what this allows you to do is put a hog ring in, and it really bites down on it, and you don't have to worry about your hog ring ripping through the material if you didn't have a rod. You'd sit down, you'd rip it, it'd just be a big mess. But before we get to that, there's something pretty cool I want to show you. This is actually the original seat cover that came out of the '49 Cadillac. And normally we'd rip this off and we'd re-foam it and all that good stuff, but man, since it survived this long, we'll just leave it for the next guy. This seat cover and many covers from back in the day were hog ringed in. So we're going to use that same process. Hog ring fasteners have been around forever. They're really cheap and you can get them and these specialty pliers at pretty much any hardware store. This pair from Matco Tools are spring loaded, so when you open them up and put a hog ring in, they clamp down on it and hold it in place. They make attaching fabric to a frame super simple. Looks good. I really like that. It's a cool look. What do you think, LT?
Looks pretty sweet.
I like it a lot.
Next, the finished product.
Hey man, how's it look back there? I know we did some pretty careful measurements. Does it fit with the truck all laid out?
Yeah, man, it fits nice. No rubbing issues anywhere. Wheel looks really good. I really think it's going to suit the stance of the truck. Now, a while ago, we showed you guys these wheels. They're a 20-inch billet rally wheel that we picked up from Summit Racing, and we wrapped them in Continental Extreme Contact DWS 06s. Now, back we went with a 275, and up front we went with a 245. They are a great all-around tire, and will even do great on the racetrack, which is where we intend to take this truck once we get it all wrapped up.
Let her down. Today, the outside of our C10 looks a lot more complete with new bumpers, lighting, and that new grille. But my favorite part are those 20-inch rallies. It really gives that truck a unique look. But one thing we haven't installed yet is the glass. So we went to LMC Truck and picked up new windshields, both front and rear. We also grabbed the rubber gasket that actually holds the glass to the frame of the truck. And to make installation a little bit easier, we also picked up a rope tool. We couldn't leave today without turning that crank to hear our LT1 roar.
good, man.
Look at it. Woo! Yeah, man. That thing is bad, dude.
That is 460 horsepower of American muscle
Man.
breathing through some Borla exhaust. That thing sounds good.
That'll be a good time right there.
I like it.
Man, I knew I'd find you sitting down somewhere.
Heck yeah, I got the best seat in the house. You know, this is a pretty cool addition to anybody's man cave or den, and it really wasn't that much work, was it?
No, I mean, this isn't really a beginner project with the tuck and roll, because quite a few hours in that, but I mean, you have a little patience, you can knock it out.
Well, it's a good look, but let's get back to work.
Let's do it. I'll put one of those in my living room.
Yeah, man, your wife would kill you.
It's Judgment Day for the C10, our 71 half-ton sporting a new old paint job and a Corvette engine under the hood. From the dyno to the street to the racetrack, we'll put her through the paces. That's all right now on Truck Tech.
When it comes to deciding what projects to work on, we like to listen to you guys, our viewers who reaffirmed our love of the 67 to 72 Chevy C10.
And for our truck that we built last season, well, today we're putting it to bed. Pun intended.
That's right. Now there's probably a couple dozen different ways we could have built this truck, from a bone stock nut and bolt restoration, which is pretty boring, to an all-out custom show truck. But what we really wanted was something that looks pretty unassuming from the outside.
Yeah, and underneath we've got the modern drivetrain that we wanted, which gives us a very dependable truck with a whole lot of power. We started with a fairly clean truck and didn't waste any time tearing it down. We then unbolted all the sheet metal, the cab, and bed. We began by sanding the frame, painting it, and installed an air suspension to let the truck sit low to the ground.
But the highlight of the build is definitely what we stuffed underneath the hood. This Pace Performance LT1 crate engine, which takes a page straight out of GM's muscle car playbook. The Gen 5 LT1 is wedged between the rails of both the Corvette Stingray and the Camaro SS. And the advanced technology delivers high performance with greater fuel efficiency, thanks in part to direct injection, variable valve timing, and active fuel management.
We mated it with an American powertrain Magnum 6-speed and a ProFit kit which made for a seamless installation. Once in place, our C10 came together pretty easily.
We've spent a little time behind the scenes and took care of some of those last-minute details. The brakes are bled, all the lights are wired up, and we gave the truck a complete nut and bolt inspection.
All right, man, let's hit the road.
All right. How long have we had this truck in the shop?
About 9 months we've been working on this thing.
You know, it flew by fast, but I'll tell you what, I am glad we finally got this one done and out on the road.
I know, man, it's always a blast to actually get it out, drive it, enjoy it, and man, you can't beat the days. And there's a lot of guys out there to look at this truck for what we did to it with the LT1 and the American powertrain 6-speed and all that and say, man, that truck deserves a much better paint job. But at the end of the day, this is actually a high quality paint job. It's just got that artistic touch for what we were going for. We knew we wanted something that was a little bit patina, not too crazy, but just enough to where, exactly, we don't have to worry about it.
And for me, having a truck that's meant to be driven, that's all in the drivetrain. And you know what? So picking that LT1 crate engine, I think was the best move that we could have made. 460 horsepower.
It's a beast, man.
And it will get great fuel mileage. And you know what? That manual transmission, shifting your own gears, there's no other way to have a sport truck, really.
Later on, we're going to trailer our C10 to the racetrack for a real-world high-performance shakedown. But before we do, the LT1 is needing some custom tuning.
We invited back our old friend Alex Pice, who is an LS aficionado when it comes to squeezing every last pony out of modern fuel-injected engines.
Well, my shop's name is Pites Performance Tunes. We've been in business for a little over a year in our current location. We currently do tuning, we do engine modifications for performance, we do a little bit of fabrication, and we really specialize in GM, Ford, and Dodge.
He proved his worth last season on our supercharged Ram, tuning this boosted 5.7 Hemi to 126 horsepower over stock.
And the 5.3-liter Vortec needed a tune after adding a turbo, hot cam, and performance exhaust. Alex went in and made adjustments to fuel mixture, timing, and boost, and brought the power up to nearly 500 horses.
Wow, this is awesome. You guys did a good job.
Most engines leave the factory with a stock tune. Connect the harness and it'll run right out of the crate. That doesn't mean it will be optimized for your specific application.
I use HP tuners exclusively because it's the best tool out there on the market, hands down. Think about the things we've modified on the truck. So we've got a different intake, we've got different exhaust. I'm going to account for those changes in the tune, modify the tune to account for that. Then we're going to take it out on the road, we're going to test it and see if our changes made a good difference and make sure the data looks good, make sure the engine is running properly, so then we can bring it back onto the dyno and to do some wide open throttle testing and tuning.
How much power can Alex dial in? Find out next.
We're back on Truck Tech, and it's test and tune day for our 71 Chevy C10 pickup. We enlisted the services of our friend Alex Pites of Pites Performance Tunes. And before we strap her to the chassis dyno,
And then so for us, it's
Alex needs to log our LT1 Corvette crate motor to make sure everything is running safely.
How does this LT1 respond to, say, a turbo or, a big centrifugal?
Oh, it loves it. One consideration on the LT1s is the pistons. It's always a good idea to upgrade your rotating assembly.
Sure.
But the power that you can get out of an LT1 safely is a little bit lower than a regular LS.
Okay.
So it's always a good idea to upgrade the pistons and rods at least.
I gotcha.
So your add boost.
Talking about like a stock bottom end LT1, what's like, say, the highest safe horsepower you go on a stock bottom end? Say, a guy just bought a brand new Corvette and he wants to, boost the thing.
Around 650, 700 horsepower.
Wow, that's still plenty respectable.
Oh, absolutely. You just have to be careful with the spark commands that you run.
Yeah.
They typically they're a very efficient engine.
Sure.
So the more efficient the engine is, the less time you need to run to make good power with it.
So it sounds like there's plenty of potential there.
Oh, absolutely. They're great engines. The heads flow phenomenal. And there's really not that much to be gained in the heads, honestly.
Wow.
Even at Samtech, where we try to improve on them, there's really not much improvement to be had with them, unless you go, pretty wild with them.
Well, and the cylinder head is really where you make most of your power,
Absolutely.
right? That's cool.
And because that cylinder head flows so well, that's even more of a reason why you don't need to advance the timing as much and wide open throttle.
So for our engine is basically a bone stock crate engine. We have headers on it, and we have an air intake, which is, it's basically stock. What would you, if you had to guess, what would you expect this truck would dyno at the rear wheels before making any tuning adjustments?
Typically somewhere around 400 to 415 horsepower. That's what I see.
Well, let's head to the dyno. Let's do a baseline and see how much more power we get out of this
Sounds
thing.
great.
All right, fire it up.
Now we've moved over to the engine power shop where the C10 is up on the chassis dyno. Now this is the time for Alex to adjust tuning for wide open throttle. Now we'll make a first pass to get a baseline and we'll go from there. And hopefully we'll pull some hidden horsepower from our LT1.
Well, our first one was 388 horsepower and 391 pound-feet of torque. Alex needs to make a couple adjustments to the calibration so we have a little bit more fuel, and we'll try another run.
RPM and throttle position have to meet certain thresholds set by GM before the computer delivers the extra fuel needed to make more power. This is where the LT1's power enrichment mode comes into play. Alex will adjust the parameters affecting these settings.
It might sound complicated, but honestly, with the use of a proper tool like HP tuners and with a little bit of knowledge, it's not too bad.
All right, let's do another run, see what happens.
All right, sounds good.
I'm excited to see what it does. We're at 417 on power, 428 torque. That's a pretty good gain for just second pull.
You know, the mixture came down. We're about 13.5 to 1. What do you think? Do we need to keep going, or?
Yeah, we're definitely gonna need to richen it up a little bit more, get to our commanded 12.6, but I think we're definitely on our way.
Absolutely, man. We're headed in the right direction. That's pretty good power. Work your magic.
All right, will do.
With a quick check of the data log once again, and a few more changes in calibration, Alex feels our C10 has a little more left in her. All right, fire it up. Let's do one more.
All right.
Cross your fingers. This is the big one.
I think we'll get what we want.
500, right?
I wish.
Maybe.
It sounds so mean.
Man, try getting a Honda to sound like that.
Yeah.
Never do it. Holy cow. 430 horsepower. 439. And 439 pounds of torque. That is awesome.
That's a big pickup from 388, and all we did was put a tune in it, man. That's awesome.
6.2 liter with headers, you know, my custom exhaust, of course. And holy cow, that's some awesome tuning, Alex. That thing really loved the extra fuel.
I think we made great progress on the Dyno. We went from 388 to 430 horsepower. You couldn't have asked for a better gain, honestly.
Woo! Get you some of that.
Easy does it, boys. Next, we run into an old friend.
Down, and you remembered your light source.
With our C10 dynoed and a custom tune installed,
Man, this thing sounds good.
we can really start to enjoy the full power unleashed from this amazing engine package. .430 horsepower to the rear wheels is more than we'll ever need running up and down the highway. After all, we built this truck as a daily driver. And Brothers Truck Parts made it easy to restore our classic pickup with new sheet metal, including this brand new bed.
Yeah, everything about it. The air suspension, man, the thing just kind of floats along with the road, and the big sway bars we put on it. This thing actually corners really well. I think it'll be a fun truck, and maybe see a road course in the future, maybe.
Our need for speed takes a back seat for the next thing on our to-do list. I'm a little bit hungry.
Me too.
I know a good place just down the road. Hang it right up here.
I gotcha. Good burgers?
Very good burgers.
I want a milkshake. Yeah, I hope they have good burgers.
Here, ladies first.
Yeah, thanks.
Welcome to Jumbo House. What can I get for you?
Hey, thanks. What do you recommend? What's a good burger?
The Johnny.
Johnny.
Most men get.
Can I add a bacon to that?
This guy, he's a little strange. He doesn't eat
no
vegetables.
tomatoes. What are you gonna do? You can have the
I
whole
want
thing.
the same thing, but put every vegetable on it you have.
You're weird.
Why is that weird?
It's a burger.
Like you want a
Beef.
bun and a piece of meat, and that's it.
$49 is your change.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. We'll bring it out to you, okay?
All right, thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.
You bet. Man, it's good to see it outside.
It looks
Get
good
out of the
laid
shop.
out. Lights on.
And yeah, it does. Wheels set it off, man. I knew it would. Wheels look good. They really fit the stance of the truck.
I've said it before, and I still maintain to this day that whoever did the patina on the passenger side of the truck really knew what they were doing. I'm just sitting here looking at it. I'm not biased at all.
You don't think you should maybe give any credit to the guy that kind of showed you how to do that by chance?
Alrighty, here you go.
Oh, thank you so much. That
Man, it
looks
looks
good.
great.
You're welcome.
Here, salad one's for you. The real one's for me.
The real one.
Yeah, that's right.
A man that can't eat any vegetables.
Nah, you don't need vegetables.
You know what? Tastes about as good as that truck looks.
Should have got the bacon though. It's good for your heart.
Yeah.
Hey guys.
I don't know if I've seen this guy anywhere before or not.
I've seen it in pieces on the show. I've watched the build. It's really great to see it out here in the parking lot. How you guys doing, man?
There's nothing better than showing off your hard work to your peers.
Think about it.
And hot rod builder Kevin Tates is certainly one of them. Since his shop is just down the road, we asked him to come by and take a look.
You know what I like the most about it is that it's a nice mix of old, you know, the saying is everything old is new again.
Right. Well, you know, we wanted to be able to drive the truck. You know, you build so many of these show trucks and you're scared to death to get the thing out of the garage, right? Always got a rag in your back pocket wanting to wipe it down. We wanted a truck that we could drive it out to a place like this, grab a burger, and if somebody pulls up beside us and we get a door ding, man, it's no big deal. You know, adds to the patina, right?
And people lose sight of what patina is. Patina is fading and oxidation from the top down.
Right.
And you remembered your light source. Oxidization and sun comes from the top down.
Exactly.
Your top surfaces are faded.
Exactly.
You know, not dogging the guys that don't really know, but you know,
Right.
the airbrush guys, the custom paint guys that are doing this stuff, they understand what a fade is and where the
Sure.
sun comes from. So nice job on it. It
Thanks,
looks
man. I
authentic.
appreciate that. You know, it's just those subtle things that make it stand out.
People remember back a few years, we did a 51 Chevy and we did a patina paint job on it. And you know, there's some haters out there, but I like it. It's an expression of somebody's art and it forgives a lot of stuff. It makes a drivable vehicle look really cool to where it's just okay to beat the crap out of it, and it doesn't even have to be clean. So I think they did a fantastic job.
There she is.
Man, it just fits so nice in there.
Yeah, you know, for the most part, this was a completely bolt-in swap. We didn't have to do a lot of custom fabrication.
Yeah.
You know, we had to tweak the headers a little bit.
It's pretty easy to draw a crowd wherever we park the C10, especially when we fire it up.
Yeah.
Hit it.
I love it.
Hey, we appreciate you checking it out, man.
No, man, you guys are doing a great job
see you,
on the
Kevin.
show.
Thanks.
I've been watching, I'm gonna keep on watching.
Appreciate that. We really do.
Next, we'll put the ponies to the pavement.
Just stay on the track.
With 460 horsepower under the hood, tuned up to produce 430 at the rear wheels, we needed a place where we could take our C10 out to stretch its legs, and we don't have to worry about losing our driver's license.
That's right. And since the LT1 would normally come in the C7 Vet, what better place to be than where they're manufactured today? Bowling Green, Kentucky. I mean, the plant is right across the street. And so is the National Corvette Museum and its famous Sky Dome. You can buy a new Corvette, learn about its history here, then cross the interstate and run it through its paces at NCM Motorsports Park. It's a 3-mile road course in 2 configurations, designed similar to La Sarthe and Le Mans, France. Now, I know you may be thinking our C10 is a little out of place on the racetrack, and hey, you may be a bit right. We never set out to build a truck that was capable of hitting the fastest lap times.
What we did build was a truck that can be driven hard, thrashed, and thoroughly enjoyed. Now we're going to take it out for a couple of easy laps to get a feel for the track conditions and our new truck.
This is our first time up here in Bowling Green. So just as this is a shakedown run for the truck, it's also a chance for us to get used to the 1.1 mile technical loop, which includes elevation changes that really get your blood pumping.
The suspension on our truck is all stock style, but lowered with air springs. Normally you would see this type of suspension at a car show with a truck laid out, sitting on the rockers.
Just stay on the track. Hold on to your handle.
In these few easy laps, it's working quite well on the racetrack, thanks to the larger, stiffer sway bars both front and rear. They keep body roll to a minimum, and this truck really sticks to the ground.
Well, we've got a couple of test laps on the truck. Everything's feeling really good, man. This thing's got a ton of power. It stops really good, and I think it's gonna be a fun day.
You know, it was a little bit scary to be a passenger with this guy driving, but we're at an awesome track today. We're on the shorter course. It's about a mile long. It's pretty technical. It's awesome, and this truck is a blast.
Man, let's hit it.
Let's go.
After playing around a little bit, we threw on some helmets for some solo hot laps. And with the power that LT1's putting down and the light rear end of the truck, this thing would get away from you pretty easy. Now, working all 3 elements, the clutch, the brake, and the throttle, with a little bit of skilled driving, you can keep this thing on the track.
Well, it's been a blast getting this C10 out on the track at NCM Motorsports Park. And I have to tell you, I think it's pretty awesome we got this Corvette engine-powered truck back to the track where it belongs.
Absolutely, man, that's a cool thing. We set out to build a truck that we could drive every day, not worry about if we got any dings or dents or whatever. And you know, to come out to a track like this and be able to bash on it, not worry about it, that's a good feeling.
Well, you know what? I think we're about ready to get shut down, so let's hit the road.
I call that it.
Load her up.